The world around us is hostile to the Word of God and to biblical values, but we are called to be salt and light, to stand for truth in a decaying culture. We are not called to run from the fire, but be willing to step into the fire. God has placed you at this time in history on purpose and for a purpose. Join us as we get better equipped to address civics and culture from a biblical worldview. Welcome to Into the Fire, powered by Dream City Church. Let's welcome our hosts, Debi and Sam Ariza.
Today's topic is living in violent times. I'm joined by Alison Furno, former co-host of this podcast and co-leader of the Dream City Civics Ministry. Thanks for joining me today.
Yes, absolutely. I am excited to be here.
Yeah, so this is a topic that I just really felt like it would be good to discuss because we've seen just the last couple of weeks. This will air in about the time that we're recording it, but sometimes they're pre-recorded and they don't air until later. But the last month, really, we've seen a lot of violence, whether it was the young woman being murdered on the subway, we saw Charlie Kirk being assassinated, in public, and then just all of the violent rhetoric that's gone on online, and people, I feel like it's just right in everyone's face right now, how this shift of it's just kind of interesting to see this spiritual shift and also this just sort of unmasking of how crazy and violent so much of our culture has gotten. And so we just wanted to kind of talk about that today a little bit, not specifically necessarily about Charlie Kirk, but about just in general, this topic, we're seeing it because I do think it's what happened to him kind of exposed it, but it's something that's been going on for a while and it's still going on. Right.
And I have something actually I want to ask you about this because I think it's really interesting starting off thinking about the spiritual aspect of the influence that's going on here. And so, we know that there's a couple of different things at play. The enemy is always working to see who he can steal, kill, and destroy, right? And so we know that if you are a Christian, you can still be influenced, but you cannot be possessed. Those that do not have God can be possessed by demons. Right. They can be directly worked through, and demonic possession is a real thing, and it really is from people who do not know who their identity is in God.
Yes.
And so what do you think from a spiritual standpoint as we get into this, all of the violence and the hatred that is going around for people? I mean, the only thing I think of is like a spirit of anger, but what do you see spiritually that is happening?
Yeah. Oh, nice loaded question.
Yeah. I was like, ooh, this is interesting.
You didn't prepare me for that question, but no, it's fine. But I do think there's a difference because we have a number of things going on. It's not obviously not all of this is demonic, but there is definitely a demonic component to it. And you see, when you open yourself up to, especially it seems like there are certain, I'm trying to figure out how to word it. Sin is sin, right? So there's not like there's one sin that's worse than another sin.
Right.
God doesn't categorize sin that way. There's not levels of sin, right? It's anything that separates us from God is sin, right? Because we're being removed, and it doesn't matter what that sin is. It separates it separates us from God. Now, we may have natural physical repercussions of that sin here on earth. You drink excessively, get behind the wheel of a car, you could kill somebody or end up in jail, right? So there are natural consequences that happen. That was just one example. But from a spiritual perspective, there's not a difference in sin. However, there are certain things that it seems like really open people up to demonic influences when they're opening that door right within themselves to that, and especially if there's nothing that they don't have the Holy Spirit there that's filling it. And you can see it in some of them. I don't know if you can see when you look at people's eyes.
Yes.
It's very clearly demonic. So there is definitely an evil that's been loosed. And it seems like that's growing. And again, we don't know how close we are to when Jesus comes back. We never know that. But you do see there are periods of time where this happens, where it's like the enemy thinks he's winning, right? Because there's all of this stuff going on, all this craziness going on, violence happening, people getting shot, people in fear. And so the enemy thinks he's winning, but he already has lost.
Right.
He's already lost the battle.
Right.
So that's what we need to remember as Christians is that, okay, even if someone is demonically possessed, God is stronger than that, right? God is stronger than that. That deliverance can happen. But we have to remember when we're doing all of this, which I think is a really good way to open this actually, is that when we're looking at all of this and we're looking, the people are not the enemy.
Yes.
Right? The people that are involved in all of this, whoever they are, and we saw that on display even with Erica Kirk saying publicly that she forgives the young man that killed her husband brutally, right?
Right.
Because he is not the enemy. There is a spiritual enemy that's happening.
Right.
And again, that forgiveness is not for his benefit, it's for her benefit, right? Because we always, in post-abortion groups, we talk about this, that, carrying around unforgiveness is like taking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Right.
You're carrying that around and it's not good for you to walk around in unforgiveness. So that's an act of that. But we can see in all of this that if we get hung up in fighting with people, arguing with people about the politics or about who did what or what should be done about it, and that's the enemy trying to keep us distracted in the natural, and we can easily miss what's happening in the spiritual realm. That's where our primary battle is. So we should still be active in engaging with other people and engaging with politics and engaging with laws and all of that stuff, but keeping the spiritual first, because then we can see better what's happening and we're not subjected to that fear and the anger that comes with dealing with stuff that just makes no sense.
That's exactly what I wanted you to say. I was like, she's going to have something great to say about it, because it is like, I think when people, look at the violence going on, you kind of get like, oh my God, what do we do? Right.
Right.
And we can't look at it through physical eyes. We have to, whether we're in person dealing with and talking with those people,
right,
we have to say, what is the influence? What is, the enemy trying to use here? And it's also making sure we have the armor of God on, right? That we are prepared to cast down arguments and everything that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And so I think coming into the perspective that it's not physical, it's not that there's just, there's people are allowing themselves to be used, people are feeding into, like you said, but if we know that it's spiritual, then we can fight it in the spiritual.
Right.
And so
it manifests in the natural, but it starts in the spiritual.
Right.
Yeah. And because I think the tendency is people either react in fear or they react in anger.
Right.
And so, but neither one of those, right, that we have to be able to keep that spiritual perspective in what we're doing so that we are effective in what's happening, because ultimately God is, if we're in the will of God, there's nowhere safer than being in the will of God, right? Because we are, and if we step out and do something foolish or stupid, then we're taking ourselves out of sort of that umbrella covering of where God's will is for our lives. But if we're walking in God's will, we can be in the most dangerous place in the world. And if it's not our time to go, He's going to protect us, right?
Right.
And I mean, you can see just the way that God has used Charlie Kirk's death to ignite. I've never seen anything like it in my entire life. It's it's amazing what's gone on.
Right.
Okay, so with that, there's some stats, right? With where we kind of currently are. So let's go into that, and then we'll talk a little bit about how we got there. Because if you look at where we are right now, it's kind of unbelievable, but it didn't happen overnight.
Right. So when we're talking about speech and free speech, we have a 2026 stat that says 40% of students say that violence is justified to stop speech that they dislike. Now, on top of that, again, talking about free speech on campus, 70% of students say it's acceptable to shout and disrupt someone else that believes differently than you. So, wow.
Right. That is crazy.
Yeah. I mean, if we're talking about 40% agree that violence is okay, they have already been desensitized to all of the evil. It's normal to them. And it's, I think what's tough about this is... and
this is FIRE, right? It's a FIRE survey, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's 2026 or 2025.
2025, 26 school year, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is current stats. And so
this just came out like 2 days before Charlie Kirk was shot, I think.
Yeah.
Like really close. It came out right before that. So it's very fresh off the presses there.
Right. And so we have to say, what are the things that are causing these kids to think that violence is the answer? We know from scientific data that what you see continually over and over impacts your brain. It impacts the way that you process. And it's really important that what you see and what you look at can be contextualized properly. Well, when you're talking about a kid and a kid sees a violent shooting on the TV, your brain doesn't know the difference between that happening right in front of you and that happening on the TV screen. So there's a lot of violence that is already normalized in our culture to just watch, right? There's horror movies and, where people are tracked down and stabbed to death. There's, just violence everywhere, right? And so not only that, then you have video games, you have AI, you have what are those things, the VR things, where you have kids as young as 6 years old starting to watch this type of violence, and then it's normal to them.
Right.
It becomes normal. And it used to not be that way. I mean, media has changed everything a lot. And also the age that kids are starting to be on these platforms and starting to see this stuff. So I think that's one, not that obviously everyone who sees that is going to go out and act, but it's about normalizing it for an entire generation where once you normalize something like that, it's not, and then with video games, you go out and you're the one doing it. You're the one creating the act. So I think that is a piece.
Yeah, and again, like you said, it's not that everyone who does these things, right? Because most people know you're doing that in moderation, or you have some sort of framework, or you have a healthy relationships that you're talking and framing those things,
right?
Or you're not doing it when you're 6, right? You're 16, and again, some of this stuff is just truly awful and shouldn't be. I mean, you really should be thinking about, okay, is this good for me or not?
Right.
And I think that's true about everything. But you also see a lot of, it's the violence. And there's also, I don't know if you've noticed this is something that I've noticed a lot, is that almost all of those ones like that you see that have, school shooters or whatever, they have some sort of like deviant sexual component to it, right? So porn addictions or, the being involved in some subculture on the internet of, some form of LGBTQ that gets really twisted, right?
Right.
And that's what we were talking before about opening that door to the demonic.
Right.
And you see that. And again, not that every single person, because obviously not. There's like a huge, there's a lot of people who are involved in those different things, but they aren't going in and shooting up a school.
Right.
But I'm saying if you're looking at the people who are committing these, there's almost always some sort of component of that, of having this crazy internet life or being on psych meds, or like there's certain components where they have that, again, I think need to be looked at where some of those behaviors are getting radicalized.
Right. Well, and if you think about all of the stuff you're talking about, if the enemy can get you to not even understand your identity, your sexuality, who God created you to be, he can also twist and manipulate other areas of your life. Yes. And, your sexuality and all of those things are part of the core being of how God created you. It's in your DNA. Yeah. And so when you start to skew not only just your belief of life, but your understanding of reality and believing that you can change your gender, your sex, all of these different things, right? Believing that you are the creator of your own identity then innately takes God out of it, right? And so if you don't believe and understand that God is your creator, he created you for a specific purpose, you can easily, your identity will get lost in the world. And like you said, when you don't have, maybe sometimes these kids don't have parents at home telling them these things, right?
Right.
And
sometimes they do, and they just get sucked into this weird internet culture that happens. Yeah. And
it's also normalizing it at schools. We've seen a lot of administrative leaders in schools across America making fun of certain political opponents, right? normalizing these words like fascist and, you know, and making all of this stuff normal and creating a political enemy in the classrooms, which is not at all teaching. It's not at all appropriate. Right. And, you know, it's something that we've been working on for a long time, trying to get that out. But I think that part of the reason that these kids are okay doing all of this stuff is because it's normalized. It doesn't start, you know, if you look at something like a school shooting, this kid did not just think of this by themselves and say, this is how I'm going to solve all of my problems. That idea was planted. That idea was watered. And that idea was built out to say, this is the solution to your problems.
Right.
And so,
or this will make you famous, or whatever their motivation is. Yeah.
Right. Some sort
this
of motivation.
Will make some sort of a statement. Yeah.
Yes. And so we have to look at, especially when we're talking about kids, that you know, what influences are around them that are impacting, you know, their ability. And there's also context, right? Like, we don't teach 5-year-olds algebra, and it's because understanding the context of what that algebra is going to do in practical application, it's not there yet, right? And so when you're talking about all of these violent things, this is out of context with kids that are 5, 10, even 15 years old, where them understanding the implications of what they're doing is not, their brain is not fully developed. Right. And so it poses a huge risk. And I think people who, you know, whoever it may be that's behind inciting this violence knows that kids are more susceptible to do these things because they don't have the context yet to understand how their actions are going to impact other people.
Right. Yeah. And again, I don't think this is something that's happened overnight. Again, this has been something that's been building. And we've seen, because I think for a lot of people, they're just seeing all this stuff happening and they're thinking, where did this come from? But, you know, being involved in the pro-life arena, I've been seeing this go on for a long time. I mean, I know I've seen where you have someone like Christian Hawkins, who's Students for Life, and is trying to have an event, and they're literally shouting with a bullhorn right in her face and trying to not allow her to have conversations with people about abortion. Or they're having fire bombs thrown at them, or the guy from the Radiance Foundation, Ryan Baumberger, was talking about how he had, you know, they were throwing like firebombing when he was talking.
Right.
And this is a kid who was adopted, and his mom had been raped, and he was adopted by a family and grew up to be a Christian, and all he talks about is love and acceptance and helping, you know, adoption and promoting life, right? And they were attacking him violently. You had Riley Gaines, who was held hostage at an event. This has been going on for quite a few years. I mean, we even saw during COVID and during 2020 with all the BLM stuff, where it was like whole entire neighborhoods that were being held hostage and they're setting things on fire. And so this escalation of violence has been happening for a while. But I don't think it's like it takes something, I think, for people to all of a sudden go, wait a minute, what is happening?
Right.
But you've been seeing it build, because you don't just get to that 40% thinking that it's okay to stop something with violence overnight. That has to be built. You have to be desensitized to it, which is kind of what you were talking about. Right.
And when you think about it, what are they being taught? And something that they are being taught is that safety is freedom from opposing views,
right?
Which is not the case. That is not real safety. But if you think that real safety is having freedom from opposing views, you are going to attack anything that opposes your views, right? Like, you're going to go out and say, okay, well, you're the violent one because you have something that I don't agree with.
Right.
And it's a horrible way to think. And it's something that's being taught in universities. It's something that,
well, in the media, even. I mean, you have this has been going on with the media, where you're talking about categorizing speech as violence. Again, using the term Nazi or fascist or whatever to categorize someone who you don't agree with, and saying that if you say that, you know, boys shouldn't be showering with girls, that you're trying to kill all of the, you know, anybody who's transgender. Like, equating words to violence and saying that if you say something, if you speak up for something or against something, that is the same as actual physical violence. And then on by the same token, overlooking actual acts of violence that are happening.
Right.
So you kind of have this weird dichotomy going on where they're doing both things at the same time and saying that, okay, this kind of violence is okay because, well, you have no other choice because they're gonna, they're fascists, right?
Right.
But also then saying that words are violence.
Right.
And it's been building over time. It's really like, it's actually pretty terrifying when you look at what's gone on for such a long time. And I think the lid is kind of flipped off of it here just in the last couple weeks.
Yeah, and it's really animalistic behavior. Your mind is what separates you from all other beings that God created on the earth.
Yeah.
And so your mind is what you use to understand, to rationalize, to contextualize. And when you don't use your mind properly, that's when you resort to physical violence, right?
Yeah.
And so you see that happening so much that they've been told not to think critically. And it's like, it's not, a school should be teaching you not what to think, but how to think. And
Right.
that is something that has been completely lost, where they're saying, this is how you think about this thing. This is how you think. And it's like, I think it's scary when people do not have a mind of their own. They can't rationalize and think through things on their own. And, it's definitely something that needs to be worked on. And I think at the core of disagreements, people are afraid to be wrong. They're afraid to fail, to be shown that they're wrong. And so they always want to find a way to look good. They always want to find a way to say that they're right without even having to prove it, right?
Yeah.
And so I think for women specifically, that comes out a lot in perfectionism. They don't want to be wrong, and so women won't even talk about things so often. They either won't talk or they'll yell at each other, And that's where all of the passive-aggressive realm comes in, because they're scared to have communication. So at every level, people need to learn to have dialogue better. Being wrong is not a bad thing. Having your belief disproven is not a bad thing. It means that you're learning, right?
Right.
And so if you truly believe in something, you should be willing to have it critiqued. You should be willing to defend it. You should be willing to say, I can stand up for this. And if I can't, if you prove me wrong, then I've just learned something.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a lot of people are just afraid to even go there mentally because they don't want to look stupid.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you do have this certain component that is luring people in online into this extremism online. You see a lot of that. We've talked about there's groups, that lure young people into these kind of cult-like behaviors of violence and destruction online. And you see even with like Antifa, groups like Antifa that are literally putting ads online to hire students to come riot.
Right.
Right. I mean, like they're literally paying them and bussing them in.
Yes.
To come. It's not funny, but it's so ridiculous. Like to think about
and teaching them to fight.
Right. It's
Yeah.
like here's a stack of bricks and a face mask and some things to set on fire, and we're going to pay you to do this. And so it's this culture that. But then who signs up for that job? Right. I mean, there has to be something to where the person that's hiring it, like the person that's going in and taking that job, obviously they don't have a moral compass that's in the right place either, or they wouldn't go do that, right? Even if they are being paid.
Right.
You couldn't pay me to go do that. But so you do have this weird, like, it's been going on and it's been more and more acceptable to do that. And again, calling, like you have, we went through during COVID where you had bombs showing up at school boards being categorized as terrorists.
Right.
Right. But then actual people getting paid to go start fires and throw bricks at police officers, that's not terrorism.
Right.
So it's this calling one thing that like flipping the words of
Right.
them, right? Really, it should be the other way around.
Right. And if you have a true if you have true grounds to stand on, you won't need to use other people's words.
Yes.
You won't need to attack other people. If you have something true, you should be able to stand on that by itself. And that's the thing. Instead of explaining their side, explaining what they think or what they believe, and being willing to put that out there, they don't have that. There is no sense of belief. And something that's interesting too is if you look at Gen Z and millennials, they are very mission driven, which is why organizations like BLM and like Antifa have been so successful, because they're driving people on a mission, whether it's good or bad, right? They're driving people on a mission to say you are making an impact, and you have people, you have community here that will support you, that will be here for you, that will, do anything for you. And people are looking for that sense of belonging, and sadly, they're finding it in those places.
Well, and I think I was telling someone the other day, it reminds me of like the 80s and 90s with the gang culture, where it was like people were getting sucked into that because for that same reason, right? You're looking for an identity and a cause and a belonging.
Right.
And so this is where you had a lot of young people being pulled into gangs. And now it's like being pulled into a different type of gang.
Right.
Where it's the same thing. It's this mob mentality of we're just going to, go wreak havoc and do whatever, but not have any reason. If you ask them why they're doing it, they can't explain it.
Right.
They don't have an answer. Whereas again, if you have something that you believe in, if it's real and it's grounded, you can explain it, you can defend it. And if you can't, then it's either throwing bricks or F-bombs, right? One of the two, because that's what you also see is just this expletive. They can't say anything, so they just cuss you out. Or they set things on fire and throw bricks, right? So it's go shoot somebody. So it's that, again, that kind of twisted nature. But you were talking about Gen Z, and I'm kind of seeing, I'm noticing, especially in the wake of the last couple of weeks, it seems like it's specifically Gen Z and possibly Gen Alpha too, but it's like this split of these really radicalized, like this stuff that's going on, but you also have very radicalized Christian kids that are strong in their faith and are willing. I have had some amazing conversations with high schoolers, with college age students in the last couple of weeks, that they're just on fire for the Lord. And they really are looking into, how do I explain and how do I defend these positions?
Yes.
Right. I've had opportunities just in the last 2 weeks to have conversations with young people about, how do I make sense of this, like the abortion debate or whatever the case is, right? I just had one recently about abortion specifically, but they're trying to take that and frame it in a biblical context and understand how to defend what they believe and know why they believe what they believe. And there's a new surge for that and for being on fire for the Lord. So it's this weird split of that generation. It seems like one extreme or the other, that I'm seeing both.
Yeah, and I think that's really good because, the Bible says you need to have a reason and a defense for your faith.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to have a blind faith. We don't want to have a faith that is just surface level. And you see a lot of Christians that have been in church their entire lives, and they do not have a grounded faith that is, understanding why we believe what we believe.
Yes.
And so I think that's amazing. It's so important. We need to ask the difficult questions, and we need to be able to defend our faith properly with grounded philosophical arguments.
Yeah. And I do think there's a little bit of a disconnect too, where it's like you have older people, because I've had kind of these double sort of conversations over the last couple of weeks, that there's like older people that, well, a normal person wouldn't do that. Okay, we're not talking about someone with a normal, whether we're talking about the stabbing on the subway or the shooting with Charlie Kirk or walking into a school, and they're suspicious of all the different things that are going on. But it's like, that is not a normal mindset. This is a warped, twisted, perverted mindset that causes someone to behave that way and think that this behavior is okay. That's not someone who's in their right mind, right? That's someone with a depraved mind that goes in and does these just blatant acts of violence. So I think people have a hard time because they think everybody thinks like they do. So they can't see and understand how we got there. But then on the other hand, too, you have this generation of young people who have grown up amidst all of the violence and the craziness, and whether it's the arguing back and forth about political things or the stuff that they're exposed to online, and yet they're they're just on fire and they're set apart. You
Yeah.
know? And I've said this before a number of times, but it's like, if you have kids, if you have young, or if you are that age, right, God has you here but we say it in the opening of the show.
Yeah.
Right, that you're here on purpose and for a purpose.
Right.
And I think, because of that generation and how crazy some of this stuff is, that 40% that thinks it's okay to choose violence to shut down speech, you have to have a tough generation of Christian kids to combat that, right? So God has already equipped them. That just gets me excited.
Yes.
Because but really, like, God has already answered. The enemy is not won. The enemy has already been defeated. And part of that is this generation of young people. I mean, how many people have stood up? I've seen it the last couple of weeks of just young people determined that they are going to do better and they're going to make a difference and they're going to be strong. And it's like God raises up that, every time there's an Ahab, there's also an Elijah.
Yes.
Right? That it's like so we have to not get overwhelmed by the amount of violence. We need to take it seriously. And I think there needs to be some things that take place on the internet to shut down some of these things, because again, free speech, yes, but you just, in the same way that you can't have, really explicit material with children, that should not be allowed to be on there. There's also really explicit violent things that should not, if we are really gonna, is that good for society?
Right.
I think it is okay. As conservatives, we tend to want just complete free speech.
Right.
But there are appropriate places, like taking sexually explicit materials out of a children's section and putting them in an adult section, right? We had that was one of the battles that went on in the libraries. But those things are okay. Like, that's not censorship to say, okay, no, we shouldn't be plotting the assassination of people online. Like, that should not be allowed. And we shouldn't, even what you were talking about, teachers, it's like, if you look at all the people who are glorifying and saying that it's okay to, that what happened was totally acceptable, the biggest percentage of those people are in schools.
Right.
The ones that have been being pulled down, like that have been reprimanded, they're either in schools or they're in healthcare. Okay, well, what is breeding in those arenas that's causing all of this radicalism? And those people have interactions with children, right? So those are things that I think are legitimate things to look at.
Right. Right. And kind of on that, I want to finish with a couple of verses that I wrote down about this. So it's like, how do we respond, right?
Yes.
We're Christians. We believe in God. And it's like, okay, well, what does the Bible say about this? The first thing that we have to remember is that the violence to opposing views is not new, as you said earlier.
Right.
So it's not new, and it's an opportunity for us to really express truth in a bold way. So it's really opportunity for us to show God's love throughout all of this stuff, because there's a lot of people that don't deserve it, but we give it anyways, right? And that's what Jesus did. Jesus also said in John 15, if they persecuted me, they will persecute you also, right? And then 2 Timothy 3:12 says, all who desire to live godly lives will be persecuted. So we should not be expecting a life that comes so easy, right? We should be saying, I'm doing this for you, God. I'm here for you, and I'm willing to be persecuted in your name, because of your name. And when Jesus was persecuted, how did he respond? He did not yell. He didn't scream. He didn't, he didn't attack. He said, okay, I forgive you, right? And so that is a big lesson in humility and in just having that grace that Jesus gives us every single day, and just understanding that that even though we're imperfect, that's what we should be striving for, is to make a difference enough, because we shouldn't look like the world. We shouldn't fit in with everybody else like normal. So I think understanding God's call on our lives, and that it shouldn't always be easy, it's not always going to be easy, is something, if we're prepared, we'll be ready.
And I think, too, another recommendation that I have on Scripture is to read Matthew 11. There's a lot of really interesting, that's actually the verse where it talks about the kingdom of God suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. But it's talking about how there was this surge because John the Baptist had prepared the way and Jesus was coming, he was there, and that there was this surge of of people seeking God and seeking that, but then you also had at the same time people who just didn't get it. Like they were attacking John the Baptist, and they were saying, why doesn't he do this and why doesn't he do that? And he's not a real Christian. You know, it wasn't Christian, but he's not holy because he does X, Y, and Z. And then they're saying the opposite things about Jesus, that, you know, because John fasted and Jesus didn't fast, and so they were saying you're not a real holy person because you are doing this, and getting hung up on those little things that they were missing the big picture and they couldn't see. And also later on it talks about the people who had seen the miracles and they just still couldn't see what Jesus was doing,
right,
and were not repentant,
right.
And he was calling them out about not being repentant in that. And I think we're in a moment like that right now, right? There's so much going on and there are so many people that are missing it. Right. They're missing the big picture and seeing, again, let's see what we can do to counter that violence with the truth.
Right.
Because God has already won the battle. The enemy only thinks that he's won, and he's, you know, doing the end zone dance, right, of like touchdown dance. But he's actually not won. He only thinks he has, and he's trying to convince us that he has.
Right.
But it's just about pursuing and keeping our eyes on what God is doing so that we are able to stand in these violent times, because we're here for a reason. It's not on accident. So we're equipped. Our kids are equipped, but we have to take that seriously and in a spiritual way, and then also make sure that we're standing and you know, trying to demand some changes of some of these things that are happening that are breeding this, whether it's at the school level, the university level, online, things that are kind of breeding this violent, perverted behavior where
right.
It's like twisted, right? The behavior that thinks that other people are not worth anything.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, it's like if you don't know how valuable your own life is, how can you understand the value of anyone else's?
Yeah. Any final thoughts?
No, that was awesome. That was perfect.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is I was going to say too, one other thing is that we've seen this a lot. So in the Bible, but also like right now people are comparing, you know, the late 60s, early 70s, there was all this political violence, things that were happening, but there was also the Jesus movement happening. I think, like I said, that whenever there's an Ahab, there's also an Elijah, and I think that's what we're seeing right now. It's this surge of crazy, violent, you know, just unhinged behavior and acceptance of evil, and we're also seeing a surge of people coming to the Lord, getting saved, getting real, and getting serious, and that's where we need to be putting our energy is
right.
in that, because that's our calling, and like I said, God's already won this battle.
That's right.
So thank you for joining us on Into the Fire, powered by Dream City Church.
You can listen to this podcast on Apple and Spotify, and follow us on social media to find all the info on the show notes. To learn more about Dream City Church, visit our website at dreamcitychurch.us. Thanks for listening.